Welcome to another wonderful, awesome episode of Encounter Grow Witness podcast with our rockstar host, Beth Spizzarni.
That's right.
And with me, Father Steve Polis. We are so grateful you're joining us and listening to this great Archdiocese of Detroit Unleash the Gospel conversation we're having so that all of us, especially our lay ecclesial ministers, our mission direct teams, can better know how to follow Jesus and help others follow him as well. And we're kind of on the cusp at the beginning of the fall season here. Beth, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Yep. Kids are back to school. We're trying to get back into a rhythm.
Yep.
And lots of things are happening all at once.
Yeah.
How about you?
That's great. Yeah. I'm, as our listeners know, I've transitioned from working full-time at the Chancery to now working full-time at Sacred Heart Major Seminary. And it's been a great joy. It's been a lot of fun kind of getting to know the seminarians more and seeing the work here at Sacred Heart Seminary, where we record this wonderful podcast.
That's right, yeah.
It's kind of an exciting new beginning year, learning a lot, figuring out how to do stuff. And, God has been so good to me this year.
That's so good.
I'm very happy with what I'm doing now, and we're going to talk about conflict.
It's true. We're probably going to have some arguments and some conflicts in this in this podcast.
You are entitled to be wrong, Beth.
As are you. And I don't think you should be embarrassed about it. It's okay. We all make mistakes.
Well, that's very kind and very generous of you.
So generous.
But we were talking about, kind of on the cusp of fall and fall stuff.
Fall things.
Yeah.
Is it too soon or is it time?
Yeah.
Father Steve Polis for pumpkin spice. Is it too soon? Are you drinking your pumpkin spice lattes?
It is always both too soon and too late for pumpkin spice.
And
I don't think there is a right time for pumpkin spice. I am a black coffee guy. I like.
Really?
Yeah.
Straight?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Very serious.
I'm sure it dates back to like my mom drank cream in her coffee and my dad drank it black.
Oh, wow.
And
You're
so
not
I
allowed
think
to
it's
have
like
cream as a man?
No. I think you can.
Half
it's
of our
just the
listeners
way.
are devastated to learn this. They're not allowed?
Hey, Beth, I didn't say not allowed. I'm just saying in our family, that's the way I kind of,
you kind of feel like you can't.
adopted it, and I started to like coffee black.
Okay.
Wow. And pumpkin spice just has this. It's such a strong
aroma of flavors.
Yeah, aroma's too nice a word for it.
It's really for the sophisticated
odor,
palate,
stench. I believe stench is the right
you may have an
noun
immature
for it.
palate. So maybe as you grow and age, you'll come to appreciate pumpkin spice
I see your
more.
conflict
I'm not sure.
style is insulting.
That's right. That's right.
No, but for you, is it too early?
I don't think it's too soon. I think it's all right. I haven't had anything pumpkin spice, but I would welcome the opportunity if it presented itself. I would welcome it. Okay. What about football? Is it too soon for football?
Yeah, maybe I'm the naysayer here. I think of football as a fall sport, right? That's what it is.
But doesn't September kind of feel like fall?
Not when it, like the first week, Labor Day week, and then the week after that, it was like 80 degrees out.
It was pretty hot. It's true. It was hot.
It doesn't feel wrong, but it doesn't feel right, I'll say.
So
I know. Hey, this was your list of questions.
It's totally my list of questions. We should go and tell all the tailgaters, I'm sorry, you cannot be out here. It is too soon for tailgating in football.
Yeah, I have a more kind of generous disposition that
really?
I'll allow them to do that. But for me, it doesn't strike me as like the quintessential footballness of it.
Got it.
What are your thoughts on it?
I don't think it's too soon. I can feel in my house all the excitement and the energy for it, and it absorbs a lot of attention, and it gives me a lot of free time to go see a girlfriend.
That's great.
Go for a nice walk, read a book, do my schoolwork, and I'm not missed because there's a lot of attention being absorbed. People seem very excited about it.
What's the object of that attention? Is it Michigan? Is it the Lions? Is it some?
Well, my husband's from Pennsylvania, so he cheers for the Cleveland teams and Penn State. So unfortunately, all of his passion doesn't help me be culturally relevant at all.
Okay.
So I'm always telling him to try to help me because I unfortunately don't care about football that much, which is hard because I'm from Ann Arbor and you're really supposed to.
Yeah, there's a school there, right?
There is a great school there.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's not that interesting. What about pies? Is it too soon for pies? Mr. Naysayer?
So
are we allowed to have pie?
On this score, it is never too early for pies. We were talking beforehand.
How differently we feel.
Yeah.
It is too early for pies.
It is too early.
Oh, it's too early. Yeah, you can't have pies, at least not till late October, November. You're not allowed.
Wow.
You can't.
Haven't you seen those old movies like
about Thanksgiving?
About the pie sitting on the windowsill
in
the
October?
Summer? No, in the summer.
Oh,
and
who's
some
doing that?
Hobo or whatever sneaks up and steals the pie
I
from
have
the
not.
windowsill.
No, I must have missed those.
It was in Oh Brother Where Art Thou. I know it was in that movie.
Didn't see that.
You didn't see Oh Brother Where Art Thou?
No, I'll add it to my list.
Yeah, Coen Brothers. Are you a Coen Brothers?
You don't know
who they are?
I don't know who that is.
Okay.
I'm sure I would if I...
Yeah, they're the best movie makers. I guess they're called directors.
Right.
Out there. They're great.
Okay,
Awesome
I'll add it
movie.
to my list.
Yeah. Oh, Brother.
But you're not allowed to have pies.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
And that's a universal?
It's
that's
universal.
Not like because there's fruit pies and then there's more
No
the
pies.
hearty
No pies.
pumpkin.
No, you can't. You shouldn't.
Okay. What about the little Hostess pies?
I don't really think those are pies. I'm fine with that. You're allowed to have that. Our producer is relieved. He's going to run out and get one.
A pizza pie?
A pizza. Pizza's always allowed.
Okay.
That's just fine. Yeah.
Okay.
How about cider and donuts?
Well, I want to go back to the pies for a minute.
We're not done with pies.
No,
Yeah.
Just for a moment. There's a great restaurant up in Mackinac City called Darrow's Family Restaurant.
All right.
That makes homemade pies, I think all year long. I've not been up there in the winter, but in the summer, I mean, they probably have 20 different kinds of pies. They make homemade, delicious. And to me, that's a bit of a summer tradition, going up north and getting, fresh fish, fresh walleye at Darrow's. And then
do they make pairings for the fish and the pie?
They don't.
The best
That's
is the
great
salmon with the
idea.
strawberry rhubarb.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you can make pairings like that.
Yeah, I don't
Can
know. And I don't think they have a bad pie. So, and I've not had bad fish there either. So I think it's just,
great food.
It's just great
all the
and
time.
great. Like, what version of great do you want? Anyway, so yeah.
Well, I'll be pleased to
pies in
visit this
summer,
lovely establishment in October or November.
Yeah, all right. Pies and summer go together for me. Anyway, cider and donuts.
Cider and donuts. I don't think it's too soon. I think September, it's a green light, in my opinion.
I think October.
October.
Yeah, I'm an October cider and donuts guy. So, do you have a preferential place you go to?
Place. I don't. There's a great place in Royal Oak. People love Donut Cutter. They've got some great donuts. And there's a place out in Franklin that the kids have been to, but I haven't been out there yet. But they say it's excellent.
There's a cider mill in Franklin.
There is,
right?
yeah. And then Three Cedars Farm, also excellent.
Where's that?
Really lovely. That's in Novi, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Northville. Yeah, Northville.
Wow.
That's a great time.
So you do skew west side there.
I do.
Being from Ann Arbor.
I do. Yeah.
I think the quintessential, probably the largest, is Blake's up in Armada. And that's not too far from my weekend assignment at up in Shelby. So I've gone up there a few times.
All right. Already?
No.
All right.
The last
Not
couple of
yet.
years I've gone up there
right.
once, so.
All right.
Delicious pies, apple pies in October too.
Well, look at us disagreeing, and mostly charitably. Can you tell us a little more about conflict and what value there might be in disagreeing even though you're wrong about pies?
Hang on, one more of these.
Yeah.
You had mentioned electric
blankets,
electrifying blankets.
They're not electrifying blankets. You would be dead.
Oh, okay.
Just an electric blanket. It's a lovely warm blanket, and you plug it in, and there's numbers. You can turn it all the way up. If you turn it up to 10, you'll probably fall asleep.
Okay.
It's great. Love it. It's not too soon.
What's the weather for an electric blanket?
Any slight chill in the air. Any slight chill in the air, and you're allowed.
Okay.
You're allowed. Yep.
Great.
Big fan.
Okay.
Big fan.
I have never used an electric blanket, so I am.
Christmas ideas for our listeners.
Yeah, there we go.
Let's send them 100, folks. Let's get them in. Everyone send one.
Yeah. All right. So all of that wonderful fall stuff out of the way.
Yep. Conflict.
And we're going to talk about conflict because it's so needed in the church. And I think, it even when it doesn't happen, it happens.
Yes.
Right?
Very true.
So if we're trying to avoid it, it rears its head in other ways. But I think it's important for us to talk a little bit about why it's okay to have conflict, why we shouldn't just kind of either give in to the loudest voice or just kind of take a vote and just move on. So it's talking about, why conflict is important is because the content of what we do as disciples of Jesus is really important. The mission Christ has entrusted to his church. And it's funny to think about like the church, the hierarchical church and the church that the Pope and the bishops have. But the church is also us, right? We're not just passive members of the church, especially, thinking about the laity. They're not just passive members of the church. The mission entrusted to them, to me as a priest, to us as the archdiocese, is really important.
Yes.
And so if we're not willing to kind of talk about the most important things and even talk about that in a way that makes each other uncomfortable, pushes each other a little bit, we're selling the gospel short, right? We're not bringing our own conviction, which we need in order to bring Christ into people's lives. Because Jesus wasn't afraid of conflict. He wasn't afraid to tell people.
No, probably not.
And
it'd be hard to read that into the Gospels.
He was bringing a gospel that was at conflict with the world, at conflict with the culture, in conflict with oftentimes, my sinful nature of what I want to do. And so the gospel, by its very nature, is rooted in conflict because it comes calling us to repent of our lives and to believe in something beyond, my most immediate kind of human or natural or carnal desires or wants.
Right. So you're saying we can't just avoid conflict and hope it just disappears or dissolves or goes away.
Yeah, I'm saying the very nature of the Christian life is conflict. It's not only conflict,
right?
But it is conflict.
Yeah.
And that's because the content is so radically important because sin has entered the world and Jesus is at battle with sin, and any Christian who seeks to follow Christ has to be battling sin in their own lives and then, however the Lord calls them to do that in the world.
Yeah. I knew one parish that one of their core values was not burying your talents in the ground, but like speaking up. And so they had a policy that whenever they were about to make a decision, everyone had to speak. You didn't all have to agree, but everyone had to speak and share something on the topic, So I do think you're right. It's important that we not just avoid having the conflict, that we really have the conversation. For the good of the mission, for the good of for the purpose of using the gifts and the temperament that God's given us, right? Using the mind He gave us to contribute and to seek what is the best.
And I think that's the other important reason conflict's important is just the way Christ uses his church, that he gives different members different perspectives and different gifts.
Right.
And so, being an extrovert and a little bit louder, I know, it's not hard for me often to kind of put forward my idea or my vision or my thoughts. But I need other people to kind of question those or to kind of make sure that they're the right way to go and to bring their own perspectives, their own gifts, and, their own portion of the Holy Spirit, which is going to kind of be in dialogue with each other, even, our heartfelt thoughts about what's best, to find the right way forward, to find the right strategy. God has given different gifts and a different portion of his Holy Spirit to different parts of the church. And that requires a way of interacting that's going to help us find the way forward. I mean, I think about the early church in Acts, and even like looking at Acts 15, the Council of Jerusalem, where there's this debate about what it looks like for the church to be both Jewish and Gentile. Do the Gentiles have to take on the Jewish identity of circumcision and dietary laws? And there were really strong thoughts about that, right? And it's not that people were like evil for thinking a certain way. That was the way forward, was to kind of hash it out with heartfelt thought. And we'll talk about how to handle conflict in a minute. But the idea that it's so important that we are not running away from it because God has given you, Beth, gifts that he didn't give me, and the church isn't going to be who she's meant to be if you're not using those gifts because you're afraid of conflict, or if I'm not using my gifts because I'm afraid of conflict.
Yeah, very true. And it matters that we have conflict. It also matters that we have healthy conflict, right? And I think that just as much as we have the absence of conflict when there should be ideological debate and constructive processing of ideas, I think also sometimes we just have really unhealthy conflict that can get that just can impact our culture, and it can impact the way that we're carrying out the work that Christ has entrusted to us. And I think about how Christ prayed that we would be one, right? Not only for these I pray, but for those who will believe in me, that through their word, so that they may all be one as you, Father, in me and I in you, that they may be in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. So I just wonder, how do I feel like that we've got to do a better job of both having the conflict, but still maintaining the unity of the body, right? The charity that should always be a part of the way we live life together, the way we do church, the way we do mission. I just think the way that we treat each other matters, and it impacts the fruit we see in our parishes, both when we're not having the conflict that we should be having, and when we have the conflict in a way that's more toxic. The
unity piece, I think, is beautiful. One of the ways I think about, the church is one, and we're called to unity, but we're not called to uniformity.
Right.
We're not called to be little assembly line products of one another, or of the bishop, or of the pope, or even of Christ. I mean, we're called to imitate Christ, but to do it in the way that he has brought us into the world. I even think about liturgy, and that can be kind of toxic these days, different liturgical fights or debates. But,
true.
I think about friends of mine who are Eastern Rite or Chaldeans. They have a different liturgical tradition. And so there is unity in diversity.
Absolutely.
And the church does this with different cultures too, right? We have parishes with different ethnic backgrounds or different expressions of the Catholic faith. The unity is in Christ, in what we profess and believe, but it's not a kind of flattening down. It's not a kind of how do we suppress everything that's different or distinct about us so that we can be kind of communist cookie cutters of each other, and every building looks exactly the same. And all of our personalities are shaved off till we kind of have no rough edges. But the unity comes from all of us using our gifts and talents for the same mission. And we have to do it in a way that expresses the unity we have for each other, right? So praying that we may be one, Christ prays that, and for his apostles, and that prayer is still efficacious for us. We are the beneficiaries of that fruit. The way we handle conflict with each other has to have a distinctly Christian character. We have to be marked by the gospel in, when you're wrong about pumpkin spice stuff, or, in theory, when I'm wrong about something.
Which you probably can't think of any examples.
No. But there's a presumption of goodwill. Right? I think we have to start with that. Huge. That we don't label someone as wrong or evil or as beyond conversation. So I think we have to start with that presumption of goodwill as Christians, that when I see you, I see someone who's striving to follow the Lord, right? And so I have to start with that. So even if you have a different strategy or a different approach than I do, that's rooted in, okay, well, Beth isn't an awful person, and I can't just write her off. I can't just say, No, but sometimes we have to start there. I can't just write her off and say, well, she's wrong because of X, Y, and Z character flaws or ignorance. I have to start with the presumption that you're approaching this as a disciple of the Lord.
So how do we have healthy conflict then? I mean, I guess I had thoughts about, sometimes we see conflict coming a ways away. Sometimes we don't, and we're just surprised. But when we see it coming, I think it's important really to be praying about it. If there's a person that you have conflict with, praying about that, and really trying to be aware personally, what is it about this person or this situation that bothers me so much? Because if we don't have that self-awareness, we're going in without without really having done our homework, right, to prepare. And I think the other piece is really thinking about, as you say, this presumption of goodwill, right, trying to understand the other, trying to understand the other perspective, if it's an ideological thing, or the other person, trying to understand what might they be thinking or feeling, or, trying to see the other perspective with empathy and compassion and also wisdom, so that we can have conversations that are more fruitful.
I think, we presume their goodwill. Yeah. We also recognize their inherent human dignity, that God has given them gifts that he has not given me per se.
Yeah.
And so I am looking at the other person, even the person I disagree with, as someone who has something to offer me, who has a perspective or a gifts and talents that I don't have and that I can learn from. Now, that doesn't mean I just give in and assume the person's right and I'm not right, because God has given each of us, gifts and talents. But we do have to recognize the way that even in the messiness of conflict, God is at work there, and that he's bringing about not just a resolution to problems and difficulties, but he's bringing about a way for each of us to be more the disciples we're called to be, and to set an example for one another. And I think that is so important, how we handle conflict. We don't run away from it, but we also know it's not kind of a total war theory that everything is allowed, right?
Yeah.
That I do have to kind of live my Christian life as an example to others, especially when we have conflict. I remember one seminarian brother here when I was going through seminary, who I just really struggled to get along with. I just disagreed with him on everything. And I remember talking to my spiritual director about it, and that great time of spiritual direction when you're telling him all the faults of another person.
Right.
Right. Really helping you grow in holiness by sharing all of another person's faults. And I remember him stopping me and saying, hey, what's good about him? Tell me something good about him.
Yeah.
And I thought for a minute. I said, there's nothing good about him. Like, I can't think of anything.
Right.
And he said, okay, well, do you see the problem there?
Yeah.
He goes, God created him in his image and likeness. Right. And if you can't see that, you need to pray and ask the Lord to show you how Jesus sees him. Yeah. And that was so helpful for me to go to prayer and say, Jesus, how do you see this guy? Help me to see him with your eyes, and not with all of the faults that I have kind of not just listed, but like put on these glasses of the lens of all the faults of this guy. So whatever he did, I only saw it through that.
Right.
And that was so refreshing, because then I got to see, like, here are all the good qualities. Here are all the things he does that, I can't do or I don't see. And it didn't kind of wash away the problems, but it did give me a new perspective. And I thought that was so helpful. So I share that to say conflict, if we find ourselves kind of creating a villain in our conflict, like, we need to go back to prayer and say, Lord, help me see this as another disciple. Or maybe it's not a disciple, maybe it's someone in the world. Help me see this as someone you've created in your image and likeness.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that can impact the way that we handle conflict is just overworking and burnout. I've seen it in so many parishes where people are working so much, doing good things, but they put so much of themselves into it that by the end of the day or the week or the project, they're exhausted. Yeah. And then really it's hard to be charitable to one another, either someone doesn't appreciate what you did, or no one knows what you did, or and I've seen it in myself, I've seen it in others where, by the end of it, the overworking and the burnout leads to snippiness, people being unkind, arguments about who gets what room when, where are the tables and chairs, you took my whatever, all these things that ultimately impact the fruit of the good we're trying to do. So I know it sounds like an odd tip for having healthier conflict, but to work less, I've been working on, years ago I was working on a project, and I thought, I could hear the Lord saying, like, okay, Beth, it's enough. Stop. Like,
Yeah.
thank you, good, that'll do. Like, run along, And I
Right.
kept thinking, well, I'll just make it a little better. It would be so nice if there was sacred art, and so let me just find some sacred art, and I'll pull that in. And anyway, by the time I finished it, of course, the project was announced, and it had been blessed and worked on for months, and it was announced. And then the moment after it was announced, they announced another project that had just come together the day before that was almost identical, and everyone chose the other project, and I just wanted to throw my computer. I was so mad, right? But like, God had told me, it's enough.
Right.
It's enough, right? And so I had a harder time having healthy conflict in that moment, because I was thinking, you asked me to do this, I worked on it all this time, but I heard the Lord say, it's enough, Beth.
Yeah.
It's enough. That'll do. Thank you.
Yeah.
Run along. and I think so often work can become kind of an addiction to us in ministry, where I'll just do one more good thing. Let me just do one more good thing. But if we can't be kind to our coworkers, then we've probably not heard the Lord asking us to stop.
Yeah. I think that's such good advice, because it does also kind of corrupt something for the Lord into something for me.
Yes.
Or, okay, it's for the Lord, but I've done it the way I want to.
Yes.
Instead of out of obedience to him. And then there's an attachment to that.
Yep. And the attachment is where you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and you can't kind of rejoice in the Lord or receive it as a gift the way God wants, whatever success for you to be for it to be received that way. We become attached and distorted in that.
Yep.
Let's talk about a couple of areas. How do we have good conflict with people who are our bosses or our superiors? How do we have good conflict with our peers? And then I know a number of people who listen to this are also in positions of leadership in some way. And so how do we set it, not just set a good example, but how do we have good conflict with people that we're called to lead in some way? So which one of those do you want to start with?
Let's start with the boss. I'll say one lesson that I've learned many times, and I think I don't need to learn anymore, I'm all set on this one, is not to bring conflict with your boss up in a group. I think I've learned that one. I think I'm all done with that. I'm all done with that one. So that doesn't go well.
Yeah.
That doesn't go well. So go in private. Go in private. And often when I didn't think it was a big deal, I just thought, but what about this? And really, there's no need for what about this in a group setting. It's better to be done in private. So I think in private, sharing ideas and sharing what's helpful and maybe what's not helpful, and ultimately recognizing you don't have control. So you can share those things as ideas and input, but that's the best I've got.
Yeah.
What have you got?
I got a couple ideas. I mean, one is, and they're both very practical, because we want to be practical here. One of them is just knowing the temperament of your boss can be really helpful. Some people like big ideas, or they want to hear kind of the exciting part, and then they're like, great, work out the details later. And others, and I know a lot of priests can be like, I want to make sure all the details are thought through before we do this. And that's something I've learned too, because I'm kind of like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did that? And then like, we'll figure out the details, right? I don't want to burden you with all the details. And that's what they want to know. And then the idea can fall flat.
Right.
So that's for an idea, or if you want to change something too. Yeah. Like, what about that? Some people are really open to that, and others require a lot more, as you said, in private and done in a way that can, just takes a little bit more forethought.
Very true.
So I think knowing the style of the leader can be really helpful in how to deal with conflict for the individual. I think another way that we can deal with conflict, you talked about doing it in private, that I think was really good. I find being direct really helpful, direct and charitable, right? So again, we all have our own leadership style, but for me, I think less beating around the bush and less kind of like, just like, hey, here's an issue. I'm just not sure what to do with it. I'm bringing it as a question, not as an accusation, right? Like, how can I resolve this better, or how can I understand what you want me to do here? And then, kind of the deeper point here that I was trying to think of earlier is not being afraid to set boundaries as well, right? Because sometimes conflict can come because you're always trying to say yes, or you feel like you can't say no. And to be clear, as you talk about overworking, to just set enough boundaries that, our life as important as the work we do is, it's not as important as the way we live as disciples of the Lord. And
True.
so if we are just driving ourselves crazy or running ourselves ragged, we need to be able to set the boundaries to say, I just can't take on that project again. Or if I take it on, like, I need to let something else go. To be able to be that direct, even about saying, I have to set a boundary here. I can't do that extra thing. I know that can be really hard, but following Jesus is not meant to be easy, right? Sometimes taking up our cross means doing those difficult things. So his burden is light, but sometimes that's a real burden.
Yeah, I think boundaries are good.
Okay, so that is dealing with the boss.
Dealing with the boss.
Let's talk about how do we deal with peers. And you've given some good ideas with that. I think, being charitable.
Go to the person. Go to the person.
In a group,
I should say
right?
it one more time.
In a group?
Go to the person with whom you have a conflict.
Yeah.
Go to the person.
Yeah.
So I would say the way to not do that well is to not go to the person and literally to go to anyone else.
Yeah.
That would be doing it wrong.
So
Officially,
gossiping.
objectively, doing it wrong. Yeah.
Gossiping
but how often
about all
does this
their
happen,
faults.
right?
Yeah.
Even just making people's faults known, right? That's absolutely not necessary. Yeah. Go to the person.
Yeah.
Go to the person. That's my best advice.
But what if they're
for
not going to
peers.
listen?
You don't know that they won't listen. We can't assume things.
Yeah.
We can't assume that they won't listen, even if they haven't listened in the past. You have to still go to the person. My other thought for working with conflict with peers is that involving leadership is important, but it might not work to wait around on leadership to resolve your conflicts. One, boss can't fix everything. Pastor doesn't have time to handle every small conflict that arises. And also there's the subsidiarity level, right? It's best to be addressed by people who are closest to the problem, right? So if we can work it out, let's just go and try to work it out. I had a situation in a different parish where, I had a coworker tell parishioners that this thing I'd been working on was a total waste. Telling the whole parish, total waste. And I was mad. I was mad.
Sure.
And instead of going to the person, I went to leadership and I said, like, I can't change what a person is saying in the parish, but if one of your staff is saying things like this, like, maybe that would be something you'd want to, just address or something, and I think that it was perhaps addressed in a way that either it wasn't heard or it didn't change the behavior one way or the other. And I thought, I was sitting there with all my feelings about it and I didn't get a chance to go to him and speak myself because I waited for leadership to address it. And so I think probably if I was doing that in the future, I would go to leadership, but I would take it first to the person and say, with assumptions of goodwill, right?
Yeah.
I heard maybe this. Is that what happened? Can we talk about that? How do we do this, right? How do we work as coworkers in the vineyard when both of us have been asked to do these important things? How could we like respect each other and each other's work?
Yeah. No, that's good. There's a podcast I listen to called Radical Candor, which is about dealing with conflict. And they talk about radical candor as one of the 4 quadrants of how to deal with it. And it's the right one. It's not the apathy piece, and it's not the, false conflict or false unity piece, but radical candor being the way that we're called to interact with each other. This is a kind of business leadership podcast, which gives advice for, how to handle conflict. But I think with the gospel, it's so much more important because we're called to holiness.
Yeah,
God
right.
wants
What was that?
you to be
but
a
not
saint.
in all circumstances,
Right.
just when it's convenient or I'm praying, right?
Yeah. So even when it's hard, or even when you don't think it'll be fruitful, they're not going to listen. Like, our job, as Mother Teresa said, is not to be successful.
Yeah.
It's to be faithful.
Right.
And being faithful means we do what's right in season and out of season.
Right.
We tell the truth, even when it might get us in trouble or it might not make us look the best.
Right.
Why? Because that's what disciples do.
Right.
That's what the life of a disciple is about.
Right.
And the same with going to a person when we have a conflict with them, as our Lord says in Matthew chapter 18, if your brother sins against you, go to him
Right.
and tell him his fault between the two of you.
Right.
If there's a problem, face it directly.
Right.
Don't run away from it.
Right.
And don't think, well, I have to kind of create a situation that's going to resolve it in a different way. Sometimes it's just the radical candor of, hey, that really hurt, or I don't think what we're doing here is right. Can we talk about that?
Right.
And to do that as peers, not only I think does it witness our discipleship more and kind of help us grow in doing hard things, doing the right thing.
Right.
It can also build really strong bonds when we're able to have those conversations with each other.
Should we, does it count if we're going on email? Go to the person? Can I just send an email?
I think it depends. Again, as I talked about leaders knowing their disposition and their approach, some people get pretty defensive, and some people are bad at doing this out of the gate, and it can help to kind of write it out the way they want to say it with the nuance.
Right.
I think email can be okay. I find I'm better in person than in email.
Yeah.
Even though I make mistakes, like I come across more human, I find in my email it can come across a little too abrupt or a little too direct, and it can almost come across accusatory. So for me, like even if it's picking up the phone, if I can't physically be there, I find that to be helpful.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's well said. I think sometimes when it's written out, it's clearer, you know, and that can be helpful and avoid saying things you don't mean. So I can see the value in that. I think oftentimes when I think of conflict that's being resolved on email, I think of really the less prayerful emails that are sent, the less thoughtfully discerned emails that are sent, the ones that are just kind of reactionary.
Yeah.
And I think those probably are not helpful in addressing any of the things that we're attempting to do here. I think typically reactionary emails like that seem to miss what they appear to me to miss, the presumption of goodwill, as I've seen them and been a part of them. So
only on the receiving end,
of course. Only on the receiving end.
And then let's talk our own leadership, how we can handle conflict. As leaders, oftentimes we're asked to supervise people. They might be employees, they might be volunteers or parishioners at times, right? Sometimes it's just conflict where it's not necessarily a volunteer, but it's someone who who you have to deal with. I'll say for my own role as a priest, some of the hardest things, but the most necessary to me, has been when I see people walk away with the Eucharist after receiving Holy Communion and they don't know.
Right.
Or they have some other plan in mind. Now, it's never been nefarious and evil that I know of, but it often is someone who doesn't know what to do, or they want to bring Holy Communion to their parent at home, and so they just put the host in their pocket.
Right.
And when I see that, I think, like, I know I'm going to embarrass this person by stepping away.
Right.
Right? There's no way not to do
There's
it
no way.
as the priest at Mass. But I think there's no way for me not to do this either. Like, I can't just ignore it.
Right.
So again, that presumption of goodwill to say, hey, I'm not calling you an awful person, but I am saying what you're doing now or what is happening now, I have to address. And I want to do it with love and charity, but I also want to do it with a kind of example setting to say, so just taking that, like the Eucharist is really important to us.
Oh my gosh.
And so I have to take this seriously, but I also have to take you as a disciple or a potential disciple seriously too.
Your
so I want to
dignity.
balance that like, okay, we have to handle this really serious situation, but I want you to know you're cared about, respected, and loved while we're doing that, even if I have to say, like, no, you need to give that to me right now. And we can talk after Mass. But maybe in some more kind of work settings at church, pastoral ministry settings, any thoughts on how to handle conflict as a leader?
I think it's hard. It's just it's hard. And I think I've worked for leaders and been leaders who avoid it,
Yeah.
right? Who avoid the conflict and just never address it, and it just doesn't fix it. It doesn't go away, and it gets better. And you lose people's respect by, they say culture is shaped by what we reward and what we tolerate. So if you tolerate super toxic, strange behavior, guess what your culture's going to be? Super strange and toxic, you know? And so I always think about that when it comes to like a conflict. Is this something that if not addressed will become a part of our culture? If so, then it's got to be addressed, you know?
Yeah.
And I think building trust is huge, and looking for agreements wherever possible, right? Occasionally I'll encounter someone who just to make it personal, because I'm a woman and that's how I think about it, I just think this person just doesn't like me for whatever reason. Maybe they really don't like me, and maybe they don't like the idea that they think I'm carrying. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm sort of tireless. I just sort of won't give up on trying to make a friend. So if I see people around, I'll go and talk to them, you know, not because I think they'll be excited I'm doing so, but because I want to build trust. I want to build the relationship, and I'm hoping that we can like move forward, you know? And so I guess I think when it comes to handling things like that, you know, I do it, I address the conflict, but I do it in a way I'm trying to be loving and charitable and hear their perspective. And I'm just trying to win people to it, you know? So if people don't think we should be doing X or Y, or they don't know why we're doing it, I just can't stop having the conversation. I just can't stop doing it. Whether they work professionally and I'm responsible, or they're a volunteer, I just can't stop trying to sell the vision, trying to win people to it, but trying to do it through trust and more friendship.
Yeah. So my own leadership style, which, you know, could be super wrong, but I don't think it's super wrong, is I can be pretty direct. I try to be direct, and I know that can come across as strong. And so I try to balance that with apologizing a lot. So, you know, because I found that to be helpful, that like when you have to say something hard or direct, you know, that really needs to be said because the mission's important.
Right.
To do that, you know, with charity and clarity.
Right.
But you know, clarity to me is directness, right? Not to leave them walking away like, wait,
what just happened?
Wait, was that bad or good that I did? Right. Like I don't really know what the cash out of that was. So I do try for clarity with charity of like, hey, this happened. Like, we just can't do that. That can't happen. Yeah. Right. We need to figure out how to fix that. Yeah. But also to know that like there are times when I've lost my temper, or I've become, you know, a little snippy, or like I'm in a situation where my patience is not great, and to be really willing to come back to that later and be like, hey, I shouldn't have done that. Like, you know, we have to resolve this, we have to fix it, but I'm very sorry for how I handled it. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I shouldn't have said that. I find that to be helpful.
See, that directness and that humility and the willingness to make mistakes, that's what makes it Christian, the way we handle it. Yeah. I had a boss once, I was interviewing for a job, and he said, I'm not a perfect leader. I'm going to make mistakes, but when I make the mistakes, I'm going to apologize for them, and I'm going to ask for forgiveness. He's like, I can do that. Yeah. And I shared it with my sister who works in the secular space, and she was like, I've never heard of a boss saying something like that. That like, I'm not a perfect leader and I'll make mistakes, but I'll say I'm sorry and I'll ask for forgiveness. Like that's what makes it Christian. Yeah. Our humility and our willingness to accept and admit our mistakes, right? Yeah. But still have the conflict and do our best.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is the balance of Christian discipleship, is to have confidence in the leadership we've been entrusted with, right? Not to walk around as Eeyore thinking, you know, we're no good and like we can't do anything, but also to say like, yeah, I don't want to be cocky or a jerk, and when I make mistakes, I need to be willing to own up to them. So for all of our wonderful listeners, I hope this has been a helpful conversation and discussion about why conflict is important as Christians, why it's important for our movement of Unleash the Gospel here in Detroit, because God is asking us to do things that are hard. He's asking us to come together and do difficult work that's really important for building up the kingdom of God. And we're going to do that imperfectly, and we're going to have different ideas on how to do that and what the most important first step or most important, next step is. And God doesn't want us to shy away from the gifts and talents he's given us, but but he wants us to enter into those conversations and conflicts with Christian charity, with love for one another, presuming the goodwill of the other, and knowing that he has given gifts and talents to others to help us together make the right decisions for the gospel to be unleashed in Southeast Michigan and well beyond.
Well beyond. This has been the Encounter Grow Witness podcast. We are delighted to have another episode this month. Please subscribe, listen, share it with your friends. We want more people to be hearing and growing together so that we can unleash the gospel.